introduction, and then I'm going to pass over to the guys so they can deliver the proper learning content from today. So, okay, let's go. So thank you very much for joining us again today. We've had a lot of these webinars over the period of the last few months, and feedback has been really, really good. This is number 28 in that webinar series, and many, many more to come over the next few weeks. We have a really, really interesting gentleman called Nemo, who's going to talk about career fulfillment. And then we've got something on virtual first aid. I'm still absolutely fascinated to see how that's going to work. But today, we're talking about suicide prevention. Are you doing enough? And I don't want to steal the glory of the guys, but that's the title of the webinar. We're joined today by Kevin and Bob from Big Dog, Little Dog. They are the experts in this area. They're the people that delivered a phenomenal webinar a couple of weeks ago on this subject, and clearly not a subject that is easy to talk about, but really important that we do. So we've got lots of stuff coming up, lots of ways to engage. Get the newsletter by going onto the IEP website and registering as a member. Get your Learning Network e-bulletin on a Wednesday. Get access in the networks, talking to people, sharing good ideas, supporting each other. And make sure that you go over to the YouTube channel and watch again all the content that we put on there. I think there's over 50 videos, possibly even more now. Lots and lots of content there for you to get engaged with, and make sure you subscribe. Really good to see Penny from what I hope is sunny Pembrokeshire there as well. So thank you very much to everyone joining us, and over to you, Kevin and Bob. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Scott, and good afternoon to everybody. As Scott says, this is the second of 2 suicide-themed webinars that we've been delivering for IEP. I know some people are online today who were here 2 weeks ago. Thank you for coming back. For those who weren't on the one 2 weeks ago, as Scott says, it's on the YouTube channel. In 2 weeks, it's gone from being the new arrival in the charts to number 8 in terms of the most popular clips on the IEP YouTube channel, which we're really proud of, because we'd like to think a lot of that is people saying this is really good, go and watch it. But it's also tinged with some melancholy in there, because we suspect that some of those views might be where people have been searching around the subject of suicide. So do have a look. The one 2 weeks ago was predominantly aimed at frontline staff to really go into some detail around the links between unemployment and suicide and how to have a conversation. Today, our focus is somewhat different. We're looking at suicide from an organisation level. So, just before we begin, the subject area is an incredibly sensitive one. So before we do any session on suicide, we always need to make sure that people are thinking about and looking after themselves during the session. We're not going to be talking about suicide, the act. We spoke about it to some degree 2 weeks ago. We're talking organisational level today, but that doesn't make people immune. If you have encountered suicide in your life, anything on the subject matter is potentially sensitive to you. So please do keep an eye on yourself during the session, and know that if you want to switch off and tune into the recording at a later date, that's absolutely fine. One more point to make on this slide before we move on. We covered it 2 weeks ago, but we like to mention this in any suicide audience we have. The language of suicide is really important. And 2 weeks ago, we gave 2 challenges to our audience. First of all, let's not use the phrase successful suicide attempt, please. We don't like attaching positive words to the act of taking someone's life. And secondly, the bigger challenge was in no longer using the phrase committing suicide. Committing is a very judgmental word. The person's likely to be feeling guilty enough already, so we don't want to laden more guilt on the person. So if we are talking to someone who's considering suicide, when we talk about suicide with each other, we prefer the phrase either completed suicide or died by suicide. Quick bit about us before we get into the subject matter. If you don't know of us, we are a 2-man, 2-dog mental health training consultancy company. The vast majority of our time is spent delivering mental health training, whether that's something formal like mental health first aid, or something more bespoke, such as webinars like these. As I'm sure you can appreciate, we've been very busy during lockdown. Bob and I are both former chief execs from the welfare to work sector. So we both run organisations. I'm not going to say like yours, because ours was small, but we know what it's like to be in the welfare to work sector. If you've never met us, I'm the big one, 5'20". I like to refer to myself as. I don't feel quite so freakish as 6'8", and Bob's the little one. People sometimes ask, so how little is Bob? And he's 5'7", which you may not find very little, but in my family, we've got 10 and 11-year-olds of that height. We got to the age of 50 and decided to jack in the rat race and do what we do now, because this is what we're really passionate about. So we do deliver the training specifically within welfare to work. We've got more than one of our clients on the webinar today, but also in the wider world as well. How are we running this session? First of all, it's a 1-hour webinar, as I'm sure you're used to. About 3/4 of that is going to be me talking, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. I've promised Bob I'm going to let him talk this time, briefly. Bob, are all cameras off?
They are, Kev, yes.
There you go, that's Bob's talking done for the session.
We're
Are all
done.
microphones off? Go on, one more line.
It looks like they are, yeah.
Good stuff. If you do have any non-urgent questions, please feel free to post them in the chat room. If you have an urgent question that you need me to stop for, then please turn your camera on and make yourself known to Bob, and Bob will stop me. We also have seen in webinars that some people just like to tune in on what's on the screen and what's being said. Fine. Some people like to talk about what's being said within the chat room. So throughout this session, I'm going to be doing the talking. Bob's behind the scenes pulling the strings. He'll be in the chat room. He may even ask a question or two of you. And as with all of our webinars, if you do want the slides, we're more than happy to email out a PDF of them. That email address, just ask us and we'll send them across to you. And I'll show you that email address again on the final slide. In terms of what we're covering today, 3 things we're looking at. First of all, thinking of your organisation, do you have a suicide strategy? What should be there? And in order to inform that, we're going to look at a bit of a 3x3 model, the 3 pillars of suicide strategy and the 3 layers that we need to look at each of those in. And it's all well and good talking about what should be done, talking about problems. We like to talk about solutions as well. So we will show you some good practice, point you towards some documents that can get you on your way. Before we begin talking about strategy, just want to bust 3 myths in our sector about suicide and suicide strategy. First of all, there's this one. And let's be honest, the vast majority of safeguarding policies don't mention suicide. So there is this myth that says it's not in context with safeguarding. So first of all, if you look at the definition of safeguarding, measures to protect the health and well-being of vulnerable adults to live free from harm. Suicide falls in that, doesn't it? And the second key point to think about when we think about safeguarding is the one risk you can never remove is the person themselves. Myth number 2, we've never experienced a suicide, so we probably never will. So the facts around that. We will briefly look at some stats from the last session. It is more common than most people think. And amongst unemployed people, that risk is even higher. Add on to that, COVID-19 and its effects on mental health, which can worsen those risk factors amongst the unemployed and introduce risk factors for all of us. So if you've never experienced a suicide within your organisations, congratulations, but no one's immune, including staff. Last myth, oh my God, a whole new load of policies and procedures, that's an overreaction. The key here is, first of all, having those processes in place save lives. If you only use it once, you will have saved multiple people's futures. And as we'll see in a minute, one suicide destroys multiple lives. And dealing with suicide has far more wide-ranging consequences than people think. It's far more than one death. If you think about if there was, for instance, a suicide in one of your offices, you've got everybody who might have witnessed it, everybody who hears about it, when people walk past where it happened, the anniversary of the death, there are so many consequences of suicide. And it's worth taking the effort to put some processes in place so that you know where you stand should, God forbid, it happen. I'm not going to do the wonderful animations that we had 2 weeks ago, but for those that weren't on webinar 1 who haven't yet watched the YouTube clip, just some key stats. In the last year of available data, there were 6,500 known suicides. More than 3 times more people died from suicide than died from road traffic accidents. The ripple effect, the number of lives affected by one death by suicide. The research we use suggests 115 people are affected by one suicide death, and 20% of those people are affected to a devastating degree. 1 in 5 suicides worldwide is linked to unemployment. That's a huge number. 20% of all suicides are linked to unemployment. And after just 13 weeks of unemployment, you're 4 to 10 times more likely to experience anxiety and or depression, which obviously increase suicide risk. We also looked at the adult psychiatric morbidity survey and saw rates of self-harm, suicidal thoughts and attempted suicide. The orange is the general population, the red is ESA customers. So we can see there the far greater risk of someone having suicidal thoughts and attempting suicide, potentially dying by suicide. Finally, we learned 2 weeks ago that suicide risk peaks at just 1 month of unemployment and then doesn't typically drop for 5 years. So we have every reason to make suicide our business. So we're going to do some polls now, just 4 questions for you. And please believe me when I say that Helen has ticked the anonymous box here. We're going to ask you 4 questions about your organisation. Please do be honest in your answer and we'll see what answers we get. So Helen, can we have question 1 up, please? Does your safeguarding policy include a section on safeguarding against suicide? Please be honest, yes, no, or you don't know. So as the stats are coming through at the moment, half of people so far don't know. 35% say yes, which is higher than I would have guessed. So I'm pleased to see that. So the results we can see, 35% yes, 15% no, almost half the people don't know. So thanks for that one, Helen. If we can move on to poll 2. Again, honest answer, please. And only say yes to this if you can answer yes to all 3. Do your staff know how to ask about suicide? Do they ask? And do you support them in being able to ask? Honest answers only, please. You've got to be able to answer yes to all 3. Yes, no, or don't know. Do they know how to ask specifically about suicide? Do they ask? Do you support them? As the results coming through, we're seeing a more even split this time. At the moment, 35% are saying yes, 30% no, 35% don't know. Thank you. I'll move on to poll 3. Do you have a procedure in place for dealing with a suicide among your staff? Bring the poll up, please, Helen. Yes, no, or don't know. So a specific procedure on what the organisation will do if a member of staff takes their own lives? Yes, no, or don't know. At the moment, we're seeing the overwhelming majority are saying don't know. So we have 17%, 17%, but 67% don't know. Thank you. Final poll before the ones we'll do at the end of the session. Do you have a procedure in place for dealing with a customer suicide? Let's bring the poll up, please, Helen. So again, we're starting to see quite an even split. 26% yes, 26% no, 47% don't know. Thank you for your honesty there. So let's have a little look into what should be in place and what they might contain. I mentioned at the start, there are 3 pillars that you build good suicide strategy on. And for each of those pillars, we look at it at 3 different levels. Here are our 3 pillars: prevention, intervention, postvention. As obvious as they may sound, prevention, how do we stop suicide happening? Intervention, what do we do around suicide and suicidal thoughts? Not just about when someone reaches crisis point. Postvention, what do we do if a suicide happens? So that are the 3 areas we really encourage you to have policies and procedures around and to ensure work within your organisation. The 3 levels that we mentioned: policies and procedures, what should be done, staff competencies, making sure people can do it, and then the most challenging one, staff and customer culture. Are we seeing the result of those policies and procedures in the day-to-day life within the organisation? A specific mention there around policies and procedures, we're not necessarily looking at huge multi-page documents. Often a simple 1-page statement is better embedded than a 20-page epic. A short procedure, and I'll show you a good practice example of a procedure near the end, is more likely to get embedded in your organisation than a 3-page flowchart. So we're not asking you to go away and write War and Peace. We do also want you to make sure that for all of that, you are focusing on staff as well as customers. Nobody is immune. So what do we mean in terms of each of those 3 contexts? First of all, prevention. Prevention is all about stopping suicide happening, stopping suicide attempts, in an ideal world, stopping suicidal thoughts. So the kind of things you're seeing up on screen, I'm sure, are what you're expecting to see. The more we can normalise mental health conversations. I might have mentioned it 2 weeks ago, a Time to Change survey suggested only 13% of people would be comfortable talking about their mental health in the workplace. Financial problems and their sex life scored higher than their mental health. Psychoeducation sounds ever so flash, it really isn't. The more we can learn about how our mind works, how specific disorders work, the better we can educate ourselves and ultimately affect our own minds. The final and probably most important one is about understanding what risk factors exist in suicide and helping people get rid of them or reduce their effects. 2 things to say on that. Number 1, if you are wondering what risk factors we typically see for suicide, watch the video of the first session. Number 2, we're greatly heartened to see that these days, welfare to work delivery models are as much about helping someone sort their life out as they are about sorting their employment out, because that saves lives as well as gets jobs. Intervention. I mentioned by intervention, we don't just mean if someone attempts suicide, we're also looking to intervene if someone's having thoughts of suicide. So we really need to ensure that we've got eyes and ears within the organisation. We've got people, not just staff, but ideally customers as well, watching, checking in with each other and being that early radar system. Secondly, you might have heard this trope said over and over again for the last couple of years. It's a load of old rubbish. It's not okay to not be okay. You need help to become okay again. What it should read is, it's okay to say you're not okay. And that's the normalization that we need to do. We need people to speak out if they're struggling. We also need to be clear so that we as an organization know what to do if someone mentions suicide. If someone threatens suicide, if I don't get X, I'm going to kill myself. What do we do in the event of a suicide attempt? And what do we do if someone actually does complete suicide? So much of this is around risk assessment. And I will just take a minute or two to spell out risk assessment for you, even though you probably know it inside out. Risk assessment in whatever context is always about three things: hazard, impact, and risk. And let's think about those in their generic terms, but also in a suicide context. So a hazard is something or someone with the potential to cause harm. In a suicide context, someone is always capable of taking their own life. So that hazard is forever there. Impact means if the harm happens, how bad will the harm be? So of course, when we're talking about suicide, it's always high. Should you ever read or watch videos around attempted suicides that didn't result in death, when you hear about the injuries and lifelong impact many suicide survivors have had, the impact is always high. The big variable is risk. The risk is the chance of the hazard hurting. And that is so variable. We can't just do a suicide risk assessment on an office or on a contract or even on a team. Suicide risk assessment is about looking at that person in real time, understanding what's going on in their life and therefore gauging whether their risk of suicide is on the up or reducing. So please, when you do think about suicide risk assessment, consider those three contexts. Postvention. So this is, what do we do in the event of a suicide happening? I've already showed you this ripple effect, and we need to be really mindful of that. That as much as the suicide is tragic, that a life is lost, there's further tragedy in the people who knew that person. Not necessarily just the people who were really close to them. Different people are affected by suicide and death in different ways. So even someone that only vaguely knew the person could still be impacted to a devastating degree. This is where we really need processes. We need a procedure to kick in the moment we become aware of a death by suicide. The support that needs to be offered is more than just to the customer or to the member of staff. Stakeholders may be affected. If it's a customer we placed in work, the employer may be affected. There's customers' families, commissioners, the work coach that referred them. We really do need to think about how can we ensure that all relevant people are accessing support. Communication strategy needs to be clear. If a death by suicide happens, then we need to be clear on how and who we're going to announce this to, what kind of wording we will and won't use. The legacy phase happens within suicide. In the weeks following suicide, that's the greatest risk of suicide happening. but that risk peaks again on the anniversary of the person's death, on the person's birthday. So we do need to be mindful that when a suicide happens, the clock starts ticking on a potential rebound effect. Similarly, there's this thing called suicide contagion. So where the legacy phase is all about time, this is all about contact with people. Exposure to suicide increases suicide risk. Suicide contagion in itself is quite a big subject area. Ultimately, you can break it down to 3 different ways that suicide becomes contagious. First of all, at a national or even worldwide level, there's the role of the media. So I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that when a story about suicide appears in the media, suicide rates change. So the more suicides that are reported, the more suicide increases. Interestingly, if the news stops mentioning suicide, suicide rates go down. There's also a very strong link about how the suicide is described. So if the person who killed themselves is in some way celebrated, and particularly if the act itself is in any way perceived as cool, for instance, risk of suicide in other people goes up. If the tone of the story is more about the tragedy of suicide, it's more likely that suicide rates go down. So the media have a huge part to play in suicide worldwide. When I kicked off about the language of suicide, I mentioned committing suicide. Every major news outlet has signed up to an accord agreeing that they will never use that phrase. So you should never see that phrase used in the press. They're aware of the effects of their words and visuals. Suicide contagion also happens on a geographic basis. So we call these suicide clusters. So when a suicide happens, there's increased risk of further suicides in that local area, particularly amongst young people. But when I'm talking geographical areas, that can include within a building or within an organisation. So if you do have a suicide within your staff or customers, the chances of a further suicide are greater than that suicide would have been previously. Please be aware of regional contagion. The third type of contagion is close proximity. Where regional is all about the place, this is about the social contact. When a friend or a member of the family dies by suicide, and this is one of the big 3 suicide risk factors. Previous exposure to suicide, mental ill health, substance misuse are the 3 biggest suicide risk factors. And if you apply logic to it, for those of us who have never been impacted by suicide before, we're aware of the subject, we might know lots about the subject, but the subject still feels like this alien concept to us. Once you've had a suicide within your group, it becomes more normalized. And in many people, it's less of a shocking thought to do to themselves. So apologies for the texty slide. To say again, you can get a copy of this by emailing us at the end. Let's just look at these 9 factors block by block. So in prevention, there are some straightforward policies and procedures that we could put in place to keep people away from suicide. In terms of empowering our staff to be able to support this, the more staff can talk about mental health, the better they are at helping people get in early intervention. From a customer perspective, the use of apps and online services these days is bringing some really good results. Right, I'm going to give him his 2 minutes of fame. Bob is going to talk us through the 5 ways to well-being. Go for it, little dog.
You caught me in mid-chat, Kev. 5 ways to well-being. 5 things that research has shown that if we do them regularly are good for our mental well-being. Applies to all of us, staff, customers, family, friends, etc. 5 things that we should be practicing regularly. We should be active. We know there's a really good relationship between being physically active and improved mental health. We should be learning. Learning is good for mental well-being. Oh, we've got people in the chat also offering the 5 ways to well-being. Feel free to try and jump ahead of me.
You're
fired. Connecting with other people is really important. It's been a particularly key one, I think, this year during lockdown. We know isolation is the death knell of mental well-being, so connecting really important. Giving is another one. We've already got that from Jimsy as well. Sorry, Simon in the chat room. And again, big one for a lot of our customers, especially people who may be unemployed for a while, been in receipt of a lot of support, not just financial, but other supports. Sometimes people lose a sense that they've got anything to give in life. And that's really important, really good, positive activity to be involved in. And the last one, Simon's got it as well, being mindful, what we call taking notice. We spend a lot of time in our life very often thinking about the past, thinking or worrying about the future. Anything we can do to take notice of the present and keep ourselves in the present moment, really good for well-being. How did I do, Kev?
I will give you 9.5 out of 10 there, mate.
What did I miss?
Your 5 a day. Bob always talks about, everyone knows about their 5 fruit and veg a day. Everyone should know about their 5 a day for their mental health.
Point well made.
Thank you very much to Little Dog. I do feel like asking people for a round of applause, but they're all on mute. So in terms of culture, how do we know we've cracked prevention? When people are freely talking about their mental health, where people are challenging stigma. Stigma has a huge part to play in mental ill health and in suicidal thoughts. For intervention, we need to make sure that we have a clear process for dealing with everything from someone expressing initial thoughts of suicide through to someone actually saying, I'm about to kill myself. So in terms of staff competencies there, we really want staff to be able to talk about suicidal thoughts. Gatekeepers, Bob and I agree, it's a rubbish word, gatekeeper, but it's the one used worldwide. Suicide gatekeeper, that's your eyes and ears. That's the person who is looking out for someone who might be struggling and having that initial conversation. We'll look at training options near the end today. We know we've cracked that when people do feel comfortable to have these conversations, and people ultimately do feel comfortable expressing that they are starting to have those destructive thoughts. That's when we know we've cracked it. In postvention, very clear, we need processes for what we're going to do if this happens, including that legacy phase. How are we going to do all we can to safeguard against rebound suicides? Good practice to have bereavement leads, not necessary to send staff on fully accredited bereavement counselling training, but having people in your organisation who can be the doorway to appropriate bereavement support. And the culture needs to be one seen as supportive. I think it's the Greek faith where often on the anniversary of someone's death, friends and family come together to celebrate the life that they did share rather than commiserate the death that happened. So some good practice, rather than having to reinvent the wheel, let's see some sources of what good might look like. So if you are going to walk away from here today and say, right, we need some stuff here, see what good looks like and maybe base some of what you do on that. We've uploaded the appropriate documents to our website. They're not our documents, as you'll see. So first of all, Business in the Community do a fantastic toolkit around supporting staff in the workplace around the subject of suicide. So feel free to go to that link. Remember, you can get the slides at the end and have a look at what's already been written. Papyrus. Papyrus are the suicide prevention charity that focus on young people, the under 35s. They do a very good school suicide policy and procedure that with a bit of work could be adapted to an adult environment. So do have a look there, please. And this is a really good one, a high school in Maine, a really good example of policies and procedures specifically around suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. You'd need to bring it up to adult and de-Americanize it, but again, why reinvent the wheel if there's really good practice out there? Good practice from a staffing point of view, yeah, let's have mental health champions, suicide leads, mental health first aiders, and those suicide gatekeepers I just mentioned. That's what good looks like. In terms of culture, a really good culture normalizes conversations. And that link at the bottom from the University of Exeter is a really good poster they created for their students to read and learn a bit more about suicide and to read and learn more about it's okay to have the thoughts, but you don't have to act on them. And this is what can help, and this is what support we bring. So please do feel free to download that, have a look at it, and see if you might want to create your own version on it. But also use DWP in terms of a good practice process. You may be aware that DWP have this thing called a 6-point plan. So these are the 6 steps that all staff are expected to follow if a job seeker expresses thoughts of suicide or self-harm. Let's have a look what they are. So the first thing that a DWP employee has to do is take every statement seriously. And you can imagine that can be quite challenging in the modern day environment, particularly challenging now Universal Credit's live, where some of those statements might be made through the journal online and people aren't picking up on them in real time. In that face-to-face environment, the next step is for a colleague to come along to act as support for both the customer and the colleague having the conversation. Step 3, ask, gather information, find out what kind of risk factors are going on so you can make a judgment on whether this is an imminent suicide or whether it's the more embryonic early stage thinking. And the judgment made there determines whether the person then applies step 4 or step 5. So referral advice if it's the embryonic early stage thinking, or emergency help if suicide seems imminent. Then the 6th and final step is always sit down afterwards, review how the conversation went, check how the people involved in the conversation are, supervision, debriefing. You can see just 6 steps and you only actually apply 5 of the 6. It's a really straightforward process. And processes don't need to be more complex than this. So finally, let's just look at some staff training options around that middle section of staff competencies. I'll just show you, we looked at them briefly 2 weeks ago. I'm going to show them again now in a little more detail. Most people now have heard of mental health first aid. The official mental health first aid in England is owned by MHFA England, and it has counterparts in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Range of courses from the Aware course, which is just half a day, through to the fully fledged 2-day I am now an official mental health first aider. Over 500,000 people have attended that training in England now, and I know some of the people on this webinar today have. Think of it as the mental health equivalent of physical first aid. You don't go on this course and become a mental health expert. You're trained in how to spot someone in crisis and what emergency support to give to enable them to get professional help. So you learn about the different disorders, the signs that someone's in crisis, and throughout the course, you're taught a 5-step action plan. So as you learn each disorder, you're then taught how to apply those 5 steps to someone in crisis for that disorder. It does cover suicide for about an hour, but because it is mental health first aid, suicide isn't its sole focus. Plenty of other learning objectives exist within the course. Really good course to send people on. Forget suicide for a moment in terms of spotting someone struggling with their mental health. Really good course. The other one's to show you are suicide specific. So suicide first aid, 1-day course which receives City and Guilds points of accreditation. It does teach around suicide prevention, spotting, and then asking someone about suicidal thoughts, knowing what options exist, and safeguarding. 1-day course available nationally. Assist is probably the longest running of these. It's been around since the 1980s, often referred to as the gold standard of suicide prevention training. 2-day course really goes into detail around why suicidal thoughts happen, how to spot someone at risk, and how to apply a formal suicide intervention model to it. If you're thinking of doing this training, be warned, if you don't like role plays, this is not the training for you. It makes heavy use of role plays to get people comfortable having the conversation. The one that people are always interested in, because it's got the word free in it, is the Zero Suicide Alliance e-learning. So if you go onto their website, there's a 5-minute, very brief introduction to suicide. There's a 20-minute fuller one around stigma, and please do talk to people about it. And there is the link there. We recommend that everybody does that. Finally, in the coming soon category, there's STEPS. STEPS is the course that we've developed with partners, one of whom's on the webinar today, LearnBox and NCFE. So we're launching these on the 10th of September, World Suicide Prevention Day. They will be Ofqual regulated awards, so formal qualifications. One is a level 2 around understanding suicide, why it happens, what works. And that will be available in both classroom-based and LearnBox, a wholly online version. And then the level 3 is specifically about how do you have a suicide conversation with someone in crisis. So STEPS is an acronym. Everyone's taught how to move the conversation through the various stages of that acronym in order to have an outcome-focused conversation. So we're nearly at the end. We've got a couple more polls for you, and then we'll deal with any questions. So, Helen, can we get the next poll up, please? Again, nice and honest, please. Reflecting back on today, scale of 1 to 5. Now you know what you know, how ready is your organisation? Without you going back and doing anything, right now, how ready is your organisation to deal with suicide? From 1, not at all prepared, through to 5, we're very prepared. And at the moment, number 3, somewhat prepared, is by far the most popular response. Can we show the results, please, Helen? There we go. So 17% not at all prepared, 56% halfway, 6% very prepared. Thank you for your honesty on that. Poll number 2, let's bring it up, please, Helen. As a result of this session, how likely are you to do something? From 1, you just talked a load of rubbish. I'm going to ignore everything you said. Through to number 5, we're definitely going to make some changes in the organisation. No number 1 so far, little dog.
I'll take that.
Lovely, thank you. Helen, can you bring up the results, please? So great, 6% of you have given it a 2. So you're likely to implement a little bit. 11% somewhat likely, But 44% of you have said you are likely, and 39% you are certain. That's good to hear. Final thing for us to know, and this isn't a poll as such, I want you to get into chat. Keep the little dog company. Can you just pop into chat, please, and think, what is the biggest thing you'll take away from today? Of all the stuff I've talked about, what is the biggest, most significant thing that you're going to take away with you? Are they chatty, Bob?
They were until you invited people, Kev. Oh, here we go.
So just thinking about this time next week, if you were to bump into me and I said to you, what do you remember from last week? What's the number one thing that you'll take from here? What's the most memorable thing we've covered today?
Couple of things coming up, Kev. Quite a few things now, actually. Paying attention to staff as much as customers.
Good.
Really good point, because we obviously, it's in our DNA very often as providers to think about customers first, and sometimes for the majority of the time. The size and the impact of suicide, of course. 6-point plan, your good practice example has been cited as well as something to take away. And also, I guess, aligning it with a health and safety perspective, that everyone is responsible, and as an organisation, it's about people working together towards preventing suicide. That shared responsibility, I like the way, personally, I like the way that's described in the Health and Safety Act, and I think it reads across well to this issue.
Yeah, definitely. So please do keep thinking and put in any in chat. Don't stop just because I'm going to take us on to the final slide. But here is the final slide. In a moment, we'll come back on cam. We'll deal with any questions in chat. We'll see how chat went. There's that email address. Again, if you want the slide deck from today, or if you have any questions beyond today, feel free to drop us a line there. And just to mention the steps qualifications that I just showed you, I said we're launching them on the 10th of September. 4 o'clock on the 10th of September, we'll be doing a live online event. So if you have got that free in your diary, you're going to find within the next 72 hours, we're going to be shouting to people to come and register on that event. So if you can and you want to, please do pencil in 4 o'clock, 10th of September, to be online and join us as we launch those qualifications. Okay. As is always the way, Bob, I ask, how did chat go?
Nice and busy, very busy actually. Some really good points and issues flagged up by people. I'm just going to pick a few. Thank you all for your inputs. I flung a question out there about people's histories. You identified, Kev, that previous involvement or experience of suicide or attempts is a risk factor for people around suicide. So I asked the question, did people ever get histories of people? And a couple of people responding saying, no, they don't, which was kind of what I expected. So people highlighting the importance of A, relying on customers to tell us, and B, the importance of us asking people, or our staff asking people as well. Related to that, you know, recognition of the importance of not just asking, but asking the questions well, has been flagged up by people as well. And a few issues around risk assessment. Again, recognition of the massive impact that suicide can have. Those figures you quoted earlier, 115 people affected by one suicide, and how those impacts can last for a long time. And I think just a key issue to flag up there, really important when we're thinking about suicide within our orgs from a risk assessment perspective. The likelihood may be very low, especially if we've never experienced a suicide before, but the impact is really potentially massive. So really important when we think about it from a risk assessment viewpoint, that we don't get lulled by the low likelihood. We do give proper recognition and attend to the potential massive impact, and therefore have some good measures in place. And as has been flagged up by a few people and by yourself, Kev, embedding an approach to suicide within existing policies and procedures works really well.
I think two stark points from me. One is that we've been working with LearnBox, NCFE and AELP for the last 6 months developing these qualifications and courses. So we've spoken to a lot of people on a professional basis about suicide. And about 1 in 4 conversations we've had have led to the other person telling us their story. So the impact of suicide is out there, whether people are telling you about it or not. And that's a really key point. The other thing to think about is asking someone about suicide is probably the most uncomfortable conversation that you're ever going to have in your life. So some people will shy away from that conversation if they're not confident on how to have it.
Kev, sorry, if I can just pick up on that uncomfortable conversation bit. When things are uncomfortable, I don't know about people in the room, I often find if I'm uncomfortable doing something, I probably don't do it as well as I might. And it always reminds me of, he was a horrible man, but one thing he was really good at was if I was ever going to go and have a difficult meeting or a difficult conversation with customers or partner organizations, funders, commissioners, whoever, he would call me into his office a couple of days before and he would make me say to him the exact words that I intended to say. And he'd make me say them again and again and again until I got through that discomfort and that embarrassment and that awkwardness. And I never left his office without a really clear idea of not just what I was going to say, but feeling confident that I knew how I was going to say it. So, you know, practice works really well when having difficult conversations with people.
And it's a vital factor. So I mentioned about assist and their role play. Similarly, on our level 3 course, if people aren't practicing the model in the safe environment of the classroom, then you're releasing them out onto the outside world, expecting them to have that conversation well the very first time they've ever had it. And that's ridiculous. So it is so vital. I'm conscious we only have 5 minutes left and we've not taken any questions. Bob, are there any in chat?
Just one that's popped up, Kev. In your opinion, if a staff member reports suicidal thoughts and has historical risk factors, like suicide attempts, in what extension company has to contact their next of kin? Just trying to, maybe a mistype or a misread on my part there. But clearly there's a question about contacting next of kin if you have concern.
Yeah. So it really brings up the question of confidentiality in suicide. We want a confidential environment because we want people to be open with us and honest. Confidentiality does not apply if we believe that the suicide risk is imminent. So I think the question is, to what extent should we be talking to next of kin? Our role in that is if we have an imminent concern, we should speak to whoever can help right now. If the person appears further down the timeline, then it may not be appropriate to speak to a next of kin. But we always want to be making sure that we're agreeing the right, appropriate action as a result of that conversation. And if we believe that risk is at all imminent, that action needs to be fast.
I think that's where your starting point of this fitting within safeguarding arrangements makes great sense. You know, the safeguarding very clearly identifies if we think somebody's at that level of risk, then the usual rules around confidentiality do not apply. We would reach out. Just a point there, of course, good practice in relation to that is we would expect you to keep the person informed that that's what you're going to do. It's not about sharing that concern behind the person's back. And never make those judgment calls in isolation. That's where ideally you'd have safeguarding leads in your organizations that would support that decision, stroke senior staff, managers, etc.
Any other questions in the couple of minutes we got left before Mr. Parkin's allowed back in?
I think we've managed to cover them all so far, Kev. Not knowing the next of kin, the police were really helpful, especially, okay, so yes, picking up here on that previous point, yeah, sometimes you may be having a conversation with someone and not know the next of kin, and turning to those organisations that can help with that, really important, yeah.
You just want to give Lucy's equivalent of a Confucius statement.
And human-centred leadership should be the culture to allow for open dialogue, absolutely. Kev made the point earlier in the session, culture, really key. And how often, I think sometimes we experience as executives, managers, senior people within organizations, spend hours drawing up new policies and procedures, even send people on training, and then we don't see a lot of change day to day within your organization. It's really important that we give conscious thought and attention and resource to shifting culture as well.
Those three layers that you saw earlier. Yeah.
For me, that's leadership as opposed to management. That's really key. Yeah. And it may be, when changing culture, that the senior people in the organization are not the best placed people to lead that cultural shift. So it's about looking for culture carriers within your organization.
And always thinking of those three layers again. So policy and procedures, what should be done and how should it be done? Should. Staff competencies, can people do it? Culture, is it being done? And culture is where we should measure everything. Any other questions in the minutes we have left? I think we've stunned them into silence again, Scott.
Yeah, I think you've done it. You're on mute, Scott.
Hi everybody. Sorry, what a fascinating presentation, and it was that fascinating that Bob didn't realise he'd muted me, which actually, for anyone that knows me, probably would understand is a very, very good thing. But it was really insightful again, guys. Thank you so much. And once again, just reiterating, you can find this probably this afternoon or tomorrow morning on the YouTube channel if you want to revisit it, the IEP YouTube channel.
I think he's jammed. I think he's experiencing some technical issues from Scott there. Hopefully he will rejoin us shortly. If he doesn't, in the meantime, if he doesn't, I'll take this opportunity on behalf of the IEP to thank everyone for attending today. It's been an absolutely fantastic session again, so thank you to both of you. If you haven't already, as Scott was saying, go over to the YouTube channel. This presentation will be up this afternoon. We'll get that added as well. You've got contact details for if you would like those slide decks. And as Scott mentioned before, we do have 2 events coming up. Next week, we have the Authentic Career Fulfillment with Nemo Shaw, and the following week we have the Virtual First Aid, which I've been involved with Paul from Greenbox Training this morning planning, and it's going to be great. We're going to need props, so make sure you all come along for that. It's going to be interactive and fun. And we also have the Digital Technology Conference coming up on the 16th and 17th of September. So if you haven't got your ticket for that, get onto Eventbrite via the IEP website and sign up for that, because again, it's going to be fantastic with lots of great speakers and responders involved, presenting lots of interesting content. So thank you everybody for your time today. It doesn't look like Scott's going to make it back in, so we'll finish for today, and I will look forward to seeing you all at the next event. Thank you everybody, and thank you very much, Kevin, Bob.
And thank you everyone.